The election of Donald Trump was a resounding defeat of the legacy of the past 4 presidential terms. And it was no surprise to anyone watching the planet as a whole. It was part of a broader, worldwide repudiation of the prevailing transatlantic paradigm of the US and NATO, in favor of the new paradigm now taking hold, a new paradigm being led by China and Russia. Consider the storm of election results worldwide that the US was a part of. Think of the Brexit vote in the UK. Think of the votes for president in the Philippines and France, the referendum in Italy, the elections in Bulgaria. The only reason to be shocked by the Trump election would be by ignoring the perspective of Lyndon LaRouche, that Russia, and in another respect China, have become the dominant force on the planet. The truth of the matter is that, in spite of Obama's assertions that he has organized the greatest economic recovery in modern history, most people's personal experience tells them otherwise. We see increases in suicides and drug overdoses, stagnant or falling wages, exploding costs for healthcare. People also fail to see the advantage of picking a fight with nuclear-armed Russia in order to support and arm alleged moderate Syrian rebels to overthrow that nation's president. What Americans want is a true economic recovery, a real future, and an end to the state of perpetual war. Like all people, we would like to see a world in which our children and grandchildren are better educated and live longer and are happier than ourselves. We want to have a mission, a sense of contributing something thrillingly important and new for mankind as a whole. In that sense, we need a huge leap in productivity and a renewed sense of the best meaning of that term.
There's a problem in the United States as such, and the world as such also. And the problem here is we've got to increase the productivity per capita of the human population. It's not enough to get increase employment. You've got to increase the productivity per capita of the citizen. Without that, you cannot win.
This short video presentation is about how to accomplish exactly that, and how to think about it. We'll present Lyndon LaRouche's economic policy for the nation, what he calls 4 new laws to save the USA now, and we'll discuss how you can help make it happen. What you think you know about economics is probably wrong, and what US experts on economics think is definitely wrong. Economy is not about money, about making money. That we humans have an economy in the first place comes from the fact that our minds are capable of discovering principles of nature, by which we increase our power to achieve new things in the world. The first great invention of mankind, it wasn't money, it was fire. The use of fire is what separates our species absolutely from all the animals, and it is the basis of the Greek creation story of Prometheus, who, in giving fire to human beings, created the human species as being the intelligent, creative, changing species. Thinking in broad strokes, new types of fire have allowed us to fundamentally change our relationship to the physical world. In one way, this has been by changing the kinds of materials available and useful to us. Charcoal fires allow us to make metals from ores. In a second way, the power liberated from the chemical bonds of hydrocarbon fuels created the steam engines of the past and the internal combustion engines of the present. The potential of nuclear power, with fuel 1 million times more efficient and energy dense than chemical fuels, beckons us into the future, allowing for a reconfiguration of our relationship to our material surroundings and our access to space. With a plasma torch, powered by nuclear fusion, we would achieve 100% recycling, and we could mine our landfills for resources. At a higher magnitude of power availability, manufacturing reaches a new level, and with plentiful energy, new solutions to water supply become possible. To learn more about these topics, see our videos on the plasma torch and on the fusion economy. Thinking on such a long-term scale the factors that truly transform human productivity come into sharper relief. What are we doing today to achieve the next levels of knowledge and physical power? Are we intensely working to achieve nuclear fusion? Or are we reverting to the Middle Ages and building windmills? What course are we setting for ourselves? Where are we going? Will we look back in a century and point to this period as setting the stage for the major breakthroughs that will have defined that coming future world? At present, there are two main systems in the world. One, the relatively dying, money-based, depressing transatlantic world of the Americas and Europe. And second, the thrilling potential of a new paradigm launching off from China's Belt and Road Initiative. The 21st century maritime Silk Road links the sea routes throughout Eurasia and Africa in a new integrated development. On land, the Silk Road Economic Belt presently features 6 economic corridors, bringing a new high-tech infrastructure platform across the Eurasian continent. Together, the full Belt and Road Initiative is bringing dozens and dozens of nations into the largest development program the world has ever seen, and it's being led by a nation, China, that has concrete plans to entirely eliminate poverty within its borders by 2020. And this is already rapidly expanding. Further agreements with the BRICS nations and other nations throughout the world are bringing this closer and closer to the World Land Bridge proposal made by Lyndon and Helga LaRouche and which has been promoted for decades. This concept reaches beyond this planet, up to space and to the moon. Again, China leads the way, with the first ever landing on the far side of the moon planned for the near future, and permanent lunar manned bases coming after. This is the future of mankind that the U.S. must join. And here's the policy to make that happen. In June 2014, Lyndon LaRouche authored a document, 4 New Laws to Save the USA Now, Not an Option, an Immediate Necessity. He wrote, "The economy of the United States of America, and also that of the transatlantic political economic regions of the planet, are now under the immediate mortal danger of a general physical economic chain reaction breakdown crisis of that region of this planet as a whole. To address this collapse of the financial system, as seen in today's banking crises, as with Deutsche Bank, the moneyed interests of Wall Street and London proposed a system of bail-in, of looting and theft, to steal from the economy to support the financial system, creating the effect of further destroying the physical economy and causing an accelerating rate of death. Take as an example the situation in Greece, where during this decade, GDP has fallen nearly in half, and unemployment has doubled. Every 100 euros the International Monetary Fund succeeds in cutting from Greek expenses has led to a 150 euro decrease in income. Such are the results of following the economic advice of the transatlantic economic order. So, what are we to do? LaRouche points to the needed remedies. The only location for the immediately necessary action which could prevent such an immediate genocide throughout the transatlantic sector of the planet requires the U.S. government's now immediate decision to institute 4 specific cardinal measures, measures which must be fully consistent with the specific intent of the original U.S. federal Constitution as had been specified by U.S. Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton while he remained in office. 1. Immediate reenactment of the Glass-Steagall Law, instituted by U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, without modification as to principle of action. 2. A return to a system of top-down and thoroughly defined national banking. 3. The purpose of the use of a federal credit system is to generate high productivity trends and improvements of employment, with the accompanying intention to increase the physical economic productivity and the standard of living of the persons and households of the United States. 4. Adopt a fusion driver crash program. The essential distinction of man from all lower forms of life is that it presents the means for the perfection of the specifically affirmative aims and needs of the human individual and social life. We'll cover these 4 laws, these 4 aspects, and provide you with the means to make it happen. Despite chronic lying by Representative Bailout Barney Frank and Barack Obama himself, the repeal of Franklin Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall Act created the conditions for the crash of 2008 then, and the imminent crash of the entire transatlantic system today. For the 66 years it was in force, from 1933 to 1999, especially up until the early 1990s weakening of it, Glass-Steagall kept our financial system stable and laid the basis for physical economic growth unseen by any other nation in the history of mankind. Think of the economic accomplishments by the United States over that period, particularly from 1933 through the 1969 moon landing. Glass-Steagall created the ability to increase the physical wealth of the nation by strictly separating commercial banking from investment banking and insurance. Under Glass-Steagall, commercial banks took deposits and made loans, thereby allowing idle money to be used by others in the community to engage in productive activity. Under Glass-Steagall, your bank didn't gamble with your paycheck, invest it in securities, lose everything, and then turn to the government demanding a bailout, leaving the people high and dry. Since the repeal of Glass-Steagall, we haven't seen any growth of the productive economy, but rather the growth of swindles, of stealing, at the expense of the population. The industrial capacity of our nation, our moral outlook, our commitment to the future, have all dwindled to a glimmer of their former selves since Glass-Steagall's repeal. Without the separation between commercial activity and investment activity, banks have transformed into parasites, rather than functioning as Alexander Hamilton intended when he wrote that the introduction of banks has a powerful tendency to extend the active capital of a country. Experience of the utility of these institutions is multiplying them in the United States. It is probable that they will be established wherever they can exist with advantage. For example, despite Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation Chairwoman Sheila Bair's testimony that approximately $15 trillion in bailouts, loan guarantees, and other government and Federal Reserve assistance was made available to major banks from 2007 to 2011, their lending into the real economy kept falling through 2012. That government assistance was used for securities speculation, and it never left the banking sector to benefit the physical economy. We must restore Glass-Steagall immediately. The so-called too-big-to-fail banks are larger now than they were in 2008. They're destined to blow any week. If they blow out now in an uncontrolled way, the destruction to the physical conditions of life for Americans in terms of jobs lost, houses lost, retirement funds lost, the chaotic breakdown of the financial system will far exceed the crash of 2008 and the image of 1929. The system has to be put under control. Restoring Glass-Steagall today forces Wall Street to reconcile their huge debts on their own, bankrupting most investment banks in a controlled and orderly way, and it will free up commercial banks to act as banks again. We don't need Wall Street gambling. Alexander Hamilton stated in his report to the Congress on national banking, "A national bank is an institution of primary importance to the prosperous administration of the finances of the United States, and would be of the greatest utility in the operations connected with the support of the public credit." Secretary of the Treasury Hamilton reorganized the post-Revolutionary War debt of the United States, developing a means of funding it through a series of new taxes. He then set up the Bank of the United States, using the now stable debt as its primary asset. The bank was able to stabilize the money supply, reduce speculation, and make the needed loans to finance the buildup of the newly unified economy. After that first national bank was allowed to lapse in 1811, a successful fight was waged to charter the Second Bank of the United States, which functioned from 1816 to 1836, during the presidency of John Quincy Adams, who oversaw extensive investment in canals and transportation made possible by the national top-down approach. Presidents Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt also both applied the principles of national banking. Lincoln, through the issuance of United States notes, or greenbacks as they were called, and through a series of banking acts, reasserted the authority of the federal treasury over all the numerous banks in the various states, requiring all banks to purchase United States Treasury stocks to hold as securities for their circulating notes. In this way, Lincoln set up a national banking system, even though he was unable to establish a national bank. Later, President Franklin Roosevelt utilized his own approximation of the national bank principle when he converted the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, created under the preceding Herbert Hoover presidency, as a means of intervening into financial markets. Roosevelt converted it into an institution for physical economic development. Roosevelt's Reconstruction Finance Corporation issued the equivalent of $500 billion in today's dollars of credit directed towards specific employment programs and infrastructure and other development projects. This credit was repaid both directly and indirectly. The increased tax revenue resulting from the tremendous productivity increase brought about by the RFC would itself have paid for many of its programs. National banking, this approach, allows investments whose returns are not made simply through user fees, but through improvement in the nation's overall productive powers. By making the goal the improvement of national productivity, rather than turning an immediate profit, the national banking approach allows investments that would otherwise not be made, and it is absolutely essential today. The need for infrastructure financing today is an order of magnitude beyond what the RFC financed in Roosevelt's time. In addition to our own national resources, the involvements of the extensive credit facilities of China, as well as its currency holdings, and those of Japan, for example, will be essential for the needed U.S. recovery. So, what makes a loan worthwhile? We're presently so far behind that, for example, a national effort to build a high-speed rail network would founder for lack of basic building supplies, such as steel. Investments must be directed to where they would be most useful. As a metric for this, consider energy flux density, an economic indicator developed and used by Lyndon LaRouche. It's a measure of the intensity of energy flow through the economy, considered at the point of application. For example, contrast the energy required to cut a material with a dull blade versus a sharp one. It actually takes more energy, more effort to use the dull blade, while the energy concentration in the sharp blade, delivered over a smaller area, is more effective and requires less overall effort. In this way, we should measure not simply energy used per se, but the density of the applied energy in an economy. By increasing this, we are able to achieve more with less effort and, of course, achieve new feats that were otherwise impossible. A priority must be given to these economic activities, those that tend to increase the energy flux density of the economy as a whole. By investing in higher platforms of infrastructure, such as efficient nuclear power, high-speed rail, water management systems, in this way we increase the potential of every local area of the economy. Just as shipping and canals made more areas able to trade, and as the railroads opened up the interior regions for development and an opportunity to transport goods efficiently, increasing the productive potential of the nation as a whole, the next generations of infrastructure increase the value and opportunity all along the development zones they create. And by improving the means of production itself, as through upshifts in the design of machine tools, the apex of the productive and manufacturing process, the increased powers of labor shape the entire created world. Alexander Hamilton writes in his Report on Manufactures of the effect of increasing the power of labor. The annual produce of the land and labor of a country can only be increased in two ways: by some improvement in the productive powers of the useful labor, or by some increase in the quantity of such labor. With regard to the first, the labor of artificers, manufacturers in today's language, is susceptible in a proportionally greater degree of improvement in its productive powers, whether to be derived from an accession of skill or from the application of ingenious machinery. The employment of machinery forms an item of great importance in the general mass of national industry. 'Tis an artificial force brought in aid of the natural force of man, and to all the purposes of labor is an increase of hands, an accession of strength. Today we must focus the increasing of energy flux density in the infrastructure public works platform, in machine tooling, and on science itself, the key to making all other development possible. Improving the economy of labor is accomplished through technological progress in an energy-intensive, capital-intensive mode of investment in basic economic infrastructure, agriculture, and manufacturing. And even occupations that don't directly change, they still have their effects improved. The produce of a farmer, maybe produced in the same way, is now going to the dinner table of a fusion scientist. The mechanic's work on a car is now allowing a machine tool operative to reliably drive to work, creating parts for a nuclear power plant. The trash collector brings this week's refuse to a regional plasma torch facility, recovering as much rare earth metals as would be gathered from a mine. Everything changes together. Productivity is about the whole. It's an outrageous crime that we don't yet have fusion power, and that existing nuclear fission power, both uranium and thorium, has seen relatively so little utilization. The next stage in our journey of higher forms of fire and control over the physical world lies in the tiny world of the atomic nucleus. If the nucleus were the size of a basketball, an atom itself would be a kilometer in radius. Yet the forces in the tiny area of the nucleus are of a power density 100,000 to 1,000,000 times greater than the chemical forces holding together atoms in molecules. A molecule is about 100,000 times larger than a nucleus, and yet the nucleus has 100,000 times more power. Put that together, and you're talking about 1,000 million or 1,000,000,000 times more power density in the nucleus. It's almost incomprehensible how large that number is. It's like comparing the mass of our solar system to the entire Milky Way galaxy. That's the power of the nucleus. It's an absolutely phenomenal aspect of nature. So don't research solar panels. Unlock this almost incomprehensibly greater potential. Through a greater mastery of the nucleus, we'll open the potential for dramatically increasing our energy supply, to transform our relationship to physical materials through new types of ore processing, our relationship to water as through desalination, and the ability to rapidly reach any part of the solar system, such as to deflect a deadly asteroid headed our way. You can't do that with a wind turbine. This is an essential component of becoming a truly space-faring species. So why hasn't it happened yet? Why don't we have nuclear fusion power today? Check out this chart. It shows a 1976 estimate of when various funding levels would be expected to achieve commercial fusion. At a maximal level of funding, fusion was expected by 1990. You'll see at the bottom a line labeled Fusion Never. That was the level of funding expected to keep programs alive, but without ever making the needed breakthrough. The black line below that is actual funding for fusion research in the United States. A decision was made and remade not to make this breakthrough, not to reach the next stage of fire that would transform our civilization far more profoundly than did the development of the steam engine. Our growing reach into space, made possible by fusion engines, will enable the next level of scientific breakthroughs, requiring the export from space back to Earth of that great man-made resource, knowledge. But instead, we save pennies while sacrificing the potential to advance on the grandest of scales. Imagine living in a society committed to achieving fusion. and to implementing its benefits. How would being part of that society shape its citizens' self-conception? A human life has consequences and meaning that last far beyond physical death, at least in potential. Adopting a mission to achieve fusion is putting into practice a goal of Hamilton, who wrote that to cherish and stimulate the activity of the human mind by multiplying the objects of enterprise is not among the least considerable of the expedients by which the wealth of a nation may be promoted. Even things in themselves not positively advantageous sometimes become so by their tendency to provoke exertion. Every new scene, which is open to the busy nature of man to rouse and exert itself, is the addition of a new energy to the general stock of effort. We need to make this happen. You only get to vote for president one day every 4 years. What about the other 1,460 days? The LaRouchePAC is active every day. For decades, Lyndon and Helga LaRouche and their collaborators have been relentlessly organizing for the new economic paradigm coming into being now. Decades of conferences, studies, reports, meetings, fundraising, videos, election campaigns, and collaboration are now coming to fruition. The outlook of the Belt and Road Initiative, put forward as official policy by Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2013, is something that the United States can adopt as well, rather than opposing. We can join this effort. We can rebuild our economy. We can have something fundamentally useful to offer the world. Work with us. Join our Manhattan Project of political, intellectual, and musical activity in our nation's center of New York. Work with the leadership of LaRouche and his decades-long record as the conscience of America. From our website, you can sign up at our Action Center to get more involved. There's so much you can do. From setting up meetings in Congress, to attending and organizing events in your area, from letters to the editor, studying economics, raising contributions for the LaRouchePAC. Help to force Congress to immediately vote up the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall as the first of LaRouche's 4 economic laws. Educate yourself on fusion and on forms of fire. Join or start up a reading group to master the ideas of Alexander Hamilton, our nation's first Treasury Secretary. Study the World Land Bridge proposal and create events in your area. Discuss how the U.S. can join this outlook. Inspire others with what's already happening and with what could happen. You can learn economics. You can be a political leader. Do it. Be that leadership the U.S. needs. It's up to us. Let's work together.